This episode is brought to you in part by Optimal Workshop. Optimal Workshop's UX research platform empowers you to build the world's best user experiences. Test, benchmark, measure, and make evidence-based decisions with confidence. Go to userdefenders.com/OW and try their powerful tools for free today. This episode is also brought to you in part by Ping Pong, the user research platform that brings the voice of your users into the design process. Run user interviews and user tests with highly engaged testers all over the world so you can iterate faster and build better products. Stay tuned to learn how you can get 25% off your first purchase.
The vast majority of people out there are not addicted to technology. It's just something we overuse. So these metaphors matter. If we call something addictive, we act like we cannot control it. Whereas if we call something, hey, you know what, this is something sometimes I go overboard on, and so I need to figure out how to manage it better. Because the fact is, all of us can manage distraction. We can all be indistractable.
Welcome to the User Defenders Podcast, where we interview UX superheroes who fight for the users in order to inspire and equip you to do the same. And now, here's your host, Jason Ogle.
Greetings, User Defenders. Welcome to episode 64. I'm your host, Jason Ogle. I'm so excited that I got to talk to Nir Eyal again about his brand new book, Indistractable. I got a chance to be an early reader of this book, so early, in fact, that it was still a Word document when I got a hold of it. So I also got to edit it a little bit as well. So I feel super honored and privileged to have had that opportunity. Huge kudos to Nir for writing another great book, knocking it out of the park. He cites all of his resources, incredibly well researched, and a message that couldn't be more relevant today to all of us. Before we get into the episode, I want to announce that I actually just launched a brand new t-shirt design to the User Defenders store, and it's perfectly timed for this episode all about becoming indistractable. The concept is simple yet quite hilarious. It's resist massaging the squirrel, and the imagery by my wonderful artist Eli Jorgensen, the illustration, is basically of two thumbs hovering over a phone that has a squirrel tail on it. So it's a lot of fun. You got to see it to believe it, maybe, and to buy it. I hope you check it out. It's a fun way to sort of nudge others around you and also keep yourself accountable about our devices and how they can tend to become our masters versus the other way around. So check it out again, userdefenders.com/store. So please enjoy this incredibly enlightening and fun interview with Nir Eyal, all about being indistractable, which may very well be the skill of the century. I'm incredibly honored to have Nir Eyal here. He is best known for writing Hooked, and that is how to build habit-forming products. But he has been at this for a long time. He's been doing a lot of consulting that's led him up to writing Hooked, and he's especially really focused on the mind, and which I love about Nir is he's got a really good handle on how our brain processes things like, again, our habits and distractions, which we're going to talk a lot about today. I am more of a recent student of psychology in my own kind of studies, and I'm super privileged to have this time with you, Nir. So welcome to User Defenders again, Nir.
Thank you.
I am super excited to have you on the show today.
I appreciate it. It's so great to be back.
We're going to talk all about your brand new book called Indistractable, which is an awesome title, by the way, for a book. And I love how you really explain what you mean in the book about kind of being indistractable and traction versus distraction. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot more into that today. But I guess I want to kind of kick things off with, can you tell us the origin story for why you wrote Indistractable? I know that you do have a neat little kind of superhero origin story behind that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things. Let me start with the big picture, and then I'll kind of zoom into an exact moment in time when I knew I had to write this book. So I wrote Hooked several years ago. That came out in 2014, and I wrote Hooked because I wanted to help people designing products and services out there to build the kind of products and services that help people build healthy habits in their lives, right? I didn't write Hooked for Facebook and Google and the gaming companies. They already know these techniques. I wrote the book to help everybody else out there building the kind of products and services that can help people exercise more or eat healthier, save money, be more productive at work. That's really why I wrote Hooked. But then, of course, I also noticed that many of the companies I was profiling in Hooked, like Facebook and YouTube and Slack and all of these companies that are so good at changing our behavior, sometimes let some people go too far. And I kept getting questions about this. And at first I kind of thought, well, it's not that big of a problem. But then I noticed that a few things were happening. One, people kept asking me these questions about, what do we do to get unhooked? How do we unhook ourselves? And so I started thinking, well, maybe I'd let I'd opened up Pandora's box, that maybe I was teaching people to build products that got people too hooked. And I noticed that, one day myself, I was sitting with my daughter and we were playing, and I get to spend a lot of time with my daughter. And so we had this afternoon where after a few hours of playing, we found this book on things that daddies and daughters could do together, all these activities. And one of the activities was to ask each other this question of, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I wish I could tell you what she said, but at that moment, I can't tell you what she said because I was distracted. I found myself on my phone scrolling away at something frivolous, as opposed to listening to what my daughter had to share with me. And so I blew this perfect daddy-daughter moment because I was distracted. And so that's really when I figured out, hey, I got to figure this out. I have to understand what's at the root of what I thought was a digital distraction problem. So that's kind of the origin story.
I love that. And that's so visceral. I think any of us who are dads or even moms, can relate to this. Any of us who are parents and we have little ones, it hits me in the gut because I'm guilty. I raised my hand, man. I've done that many times, and and I have an Apple Watch now. And so if I forget to set my do not disturb, then I get pinged, and it could be during like story time with the girls. And, even if I don't just immediately look at it, there's that trigger, that's like constantly in my mind, like distracting me from that special time with my daughters of like, well, who could that be? What could they want? Oh, what if it's important, right? Like all these little things internally in our minds. And so it's unhealthy. And so I totally feel that, man, in my gut. So what a neat kind of origin story for writing this book. And I'm going to kind of follow up with maybe a bit of a tough question. But I do think it's important. And I do want to ask you because, you did write Hooked with good intentions. And I think I remember even reading in Hooked, you said it's not a superpower if it can't be used for evil. And I thought that was just so eye-opening to me. And that's so true. And it's like, even like Kranzberg's first law, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. It's an amplifier. It's whoever is using it. It's just like many things in life, that are intended for good can be used for bad. So I guess that's my long-winded way of asking you, is this book Indistractable, is it maybe a response to kind of some of how people have misused this superpower that you've taught us how to use, and is it sort of maybe even a cleansing of the conscience?
It started out that way. So originally I was going to call the book Unhooked because it was supposed to be kind of a mea culpa. But then, here's what I did. I read everything I could possibly get my hands on in terms of why people are suffering, why I was suffering, I should say, from this digital distraction problem. And every book I could find on this topic pointed the finger at the technology. And so I thought, okay, well, clearly all these smart people think it's the technology that's causing this, so they must be right. And so let me do what they tell me to do. So I did the digital detox, and I did the digital minimalism, and I did the get rid of all your devices. And I tried to purge all this stuff from my life. I got a feature phone with no apps. All it did was calls and text messages. And I stopped using my social media accounts, and I did what they told me to do. And guess what? It's bullshit. Doesn't work. Here's what happened. I sat down at my desk to write, which is the hardest thing I do. It's, professionally at least, it requires a lot of focus, a lot of concentration. You cannot be distracted and write something good. You have to focus. And I'd sit down at my desk to write, and I'd think to myself, oh, you know what? There's that book back there I've been meaning to read. I should probably just flip through that real quick. And, oh, you know what? The laundry really needs to be folded. I should probably do that. And, I haven't called my parents in weeks. I should do that. And what I found was this fundamental truth, which really changed my view of this entire problem, which is this fact that distraction starts from within. that it's not about the thing that is distracting us. It's about why we get distracted in the first place. And so that's when I decided to open up the aperture of the question I was trying to answer, which started out as, how do we manage digital distraction, which is what basically every other book tries to manage, right? How to, stop using tech because tech is melting your brain. And what I realized is that that's a really convenient excuse, right? Yeah. It's a really convenient excuse to say it's the technology's fault, because that's much more, that feels a lot better than asking oneself, what am I escaping from? What's the feeling that I'm using a distraction to escape? Here's the fundamental truth, that everything that humans do is done for one reason, and that reason is to escape discomfort. It's called the homeostatic response, that when we feel physically uncomfortable, we act, right? If you're cold, you put on a coat. When you go inside and you feel hot again, you take it off. If you're hungry, you feel hunger pangs and you eat. If you're full, that doesn't feel good, you stop eating. So that's the homeostatic response when it comes to physical sensations. And it turns out the same exact thing happens to our psychological states. I talk about this a lot in Hooked, and I think the same rules apply in Indistractable, that when we are lonely, we check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we go to Google. When we're bored, we turn on the television, or we watch the news. We look at the news or sports scores or stock prices, right? There are lots of things to satisfy these negative internal states, these internal triggers. And so if we don't start with those internal triggers, we will always be distracted by something. And so that's why the first step, I have this 4-part model. I'm very partial to 4-part models. This 4-part model in Indistractable. And the first step is to learn to manage these internal triggers. That if we don't figure out what it is we're escaping from, something will always distract us. And guess what? Things have been distracting people forever. Plato and Socrates talk about the nature of acrasia. This was 2,500 years ago. They were complaining about how distracting the world is and how this modern technology of writing was the worst thing ever, and it's going to melt people's brains. Like literally, that is what Socrates warns us about, is how the written word is a terrible technology. And of course, you fast forward to novels were supposed to be the worst thing ever, and radio was supposed to melt kids' brains, and of course, television caused couch potatoes. And every new technology, we tend to have this moral panic, and we blame the technology because it's so uncomfortable to take a look inwards and ask ourselves, what are we escaping? In my case, I'll tell you exactly what I was escaping. Many things that I was escaping in my life. When I was with my daughter and I was checking my phone as opposed to being with her, I'll be honest with you, there's only so much toddler time that I could take. I needed a break, but I should have learned to handle that in a healthier manner than to be on my device and snub my daughter. And I should have learned to handle that in a better way. And so that's really the first section of Indistractable, is teaching folks, and the way I taught myself, how to manage these internal triggers. How do we put these uncomfortable emotional states in their place and deal with them in the more healthful manner? And I'm just going to say a little disclaimer, not with meditation. Because, and not that meditation is bad, but I am sick to death of people telling me to go meditate. I don't want to fucking meditate. I've tried it many times. It's not my thing. And I think many people agree with me that it's not their thing either. If it is your thing, awesome. Meditate away if it works for you. But that is not the kind of advice I give in this book.
So much good stuff in there, Nir. The homeostatic response, that was so eye-opening for me when I read this in your book, and it explained so much to me. It helped me understand so much of why I do what I do. Like the whole idea of how our bodies are just, they're designed for stability. They're designed to kind of always be in that wellness state. I think the Greeks call it eudaimonia. So of course, in the society that we live in, we're trained in our, digital economy, especially if we're bored, as you touched on, well, what's the cure for that? What's the cure for the dis-ease, if we will? It's, pull out our phone and just check Facebook, check Twitter, check the news. It kind of brings us into that homeostatic phase where we don't allow ourselves to be bored anymore. And I think that's unhealthy. I know it is. And I was thinking about like Abraham Lincoln, when he gave the Gettysburg Address. I can read like the first maybe 25 words before I get stinking bored. I think they were in there for 7 hours. People were in there for 7 hours. They didn't have smartphones. They were listening attentively. At least I think they were, for the most part. Maybe they got bored after the 5th hour, but I mean, my goodness, our attention spans are so short now. So I'm just kind of, I'm kind of venting with you a little bit about this. But again, the eye-opening nature of the homeostatic response, that like really changed my thinking about all this. And it was because, thanks to your book, how you go into the psychology behind it too. And so I just really appreciate that level of insight that I gained reading Indistractable and kind of understanding more why I'm so kind of quick to try to ease my pain. What's the general root of our pain? What are we seeking relief from? Is it, boredom? Yes, but what else is going on that we're doing this?
We are hardwired to be this way. And this is why I think it's so important to understand this, because the knee-jerk reaction is to blame the thing that distracts us, right? As humans have always done. Whatever it is that is causing the pain, whatever thing that is most visible in front of us, that's the thing that we blame. But we know what we call that. That's called a scapegoat, right? That's the reason the world is the way it is because of some scapegoat. And today there are lots of scapegoats for our problems in society because it's very convenient to blame somebody else for your problems as opposed to blaming ourselves and looking deeper inside. The fact is, you are built to be discomforted. The human species is not designed to be chill, right? Because think about it, our ancestors that had the genetic variation, let's say hypothetically, of chilling, right? Of just hanging out, they got eaten or beaten, right? And so that was not an evolutionary adaptation that you would want to have trying to survive for the vast majority of human history for the past 200,000 years. What you needed was a species that was never satisfied, that always wanted more. I mean, it's that same animal instinct to keep striving, to keep achieving, to never sit still. This is what got us to the moon. This is what helped us, conquer the planet. This is what helped us achieve scientific revolutions and revolutions in understanding about our world, is always this restless drive to do more. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we should be very thankful for that drive. But it also means we need to know how to harness it and not let it get the best of us. And so by understanding that, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable, that is the natural human state. We are so fixated. There's been so much self-help malarkey out there telling people that they're always supposed to be happy all the time. Our natural state is not happy. That is a fleeting feeling to remind us about what we are striving for. But nobody, unless you're, on some kind of psychotropic substance, is always happy, right? When you ask people in the moment, yeah, they'll say, okay, I'm generally happy, most people. But they're not like, euphoric all the time. That's not how our species is designed. Our species is designed to, in fact, quite the opposite, to be always uncomfortable. So we should manage that. We should understand that when we are feeling these uncomfortable emotional states like boredom, like fatigue, like uncertainty, like worry, those are just internal triggers that can prompt us to action. If we can harness those actions, those prompts to action in the right way, we'll be better for it. So as opposed to, turning to something like the television set or another glass of wine, or, you name the potential alleviator of discomfort, we can harness that discomfort, those internal triggers, to do us good, to use it in a positive manner.
Yeah, I loved that takeaway as well, Nir, in your book. It's about us always, we're always wanting to be better. And I think it comes from that stems from that, what you mentioned, that kind of discontentment that I think we're always, like you said, we're always going to kind of feel that way. But I'm glad that exists because, as you mentioned, some of our greatest achievements and innovations and life-saving and life-giving technologies have come through this root of dissatisfaction. So I think there's actually a really good side of that none of us really talk about. I think we just need to learn how to temper, right? Find that kind of that balance, that homeostasis in our desires as well.
And knowing when to turn it off and when to turn it on, right? Like there are definitely times when that's a very useful response. But of course, when it gets the best of us, when we do things that we later regret, then it didn't serve us. And so that kind of takes me to the next step of this model that I provide, this 4-step model in Indistractable. I'll give you the 4 steps kind of as an overview. So step 1 is to manage internal triggers. And I'm giving you the 30,000 foot overview here. There's a lot more depth to it in terms of, I give you very practical, actionable strategies that you can use to actually do what I'm proposing. So step 1 is to manage the internal triggers, to recognize that distraction starts from within, that if we don't understand these internal triggers and have coping strategies for them, we will always get distracted by something, always. So that's the first step. The second step is to make time for traction. So I give this kind of spectrum, right, that there's 2 sides of our actions. Our actions can either be acts of traction or acts of distraction. So traction is doing something that moves you towards what you want in life. If you notice, traction and distraction both end in the same word. They both end in the word action, right? So traction are things that you want to do, things that move you forward to what you want. Distraction is the opposite of that. Distraction is anything that moves you away from what you really want. But how do we know the difference between the two? The fact is, in the moment, we can't rely on our feelings. When you're, scrolling endlessly on Instagram or Slack or, doing something, or email, or doing something that you don't want to do in retrospect, in the minute, it feels like, oh, this is productive, right? This is something, email, I need to do that. That's for work, right? It feels productive. But at the moment, if that's not what you wanted to do, then it's a distraction. It's not an act of traction. So how do we tell the difference? The only way to tell the difference between traction and distraction is intent. That, the first thing I ask folks when I hear about how distracted they are, they say, oh my gosh, I can't concentrate on anything, the Twitter and the Facebook and whatever, the president tweeted today or whatever's happening in the news, everything's so distracting all the time. And my question to them is, look, that's awful. I'm really sorry that you're struggling with this. Can I see what it is that you got distracted from? Right? What did you plan to do that then these technologies took you away from? And they sheepishly take out their phones and they show me their calendar. And almost every time, without fail, there ain't nothing on that calendar. It's blank. Or maybe there's like a dentist appointment or something, right? So the fact is, here's the thing. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Only about 10% of people keep a calendar. I don't want to hear that technology is distracting and addictive and hijacking your brain if you didn't put on your calendar what it is you plan to do with your time. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. And that means in this day and age, if you don't plan your time, somebody else will. And I mean down to the minute. We need to start using this technique called time boxing, where you put time in your calendar for what it is that's important to you in your life to help you live out your values. Time with your kids, time on yourself, on your body, on your mental, on your physical well-being, time, of course, at work, what you plan to do with that time. 10%, the fact that 90% of the people out there don't keep a strict calendar, and probably even fewer keep a time box calendar, is a huge source of the problem of why we get distracted. So I have several chapters in the book on exactly how to do this. It's more complicated than people think, but once you start this technique of planning out your day, it's a life changer. So that's the second step, is make time for traction.
Imagine a world where people don't have to feel lost, confused, or frustrated while trying to find and do things online. Now imagine a world where the right things are in the right places. Websites, apps, and intranets where people can easily find the things they're looking for. Optimal Workshop empowers you to build the world's best user experiences. Test, benchmark, measure, and make evidence-based decisions with confidence. If you're ready to create better experiences for your users, go to userdefenders.com/OW and try their tools for free today.
The third step is to hack back external triggers. So external triggers are these things in our environment, unlike internal triggers, which are inside our heads. External triggers are the pings, the dings, the rings that prompt us to get distracted. They are not the distraction. We tend to think of, the iPhone buzzing as the distraction. No. The distraction is the action that you took in response to that external trigger. If the external trigger serves you, for example, if your alarm clock rings, that's an external trigger, but it serves you because it helps you act according to what you wanted to do with intent, which was to wake up and head to the gym or do whatever you wanted to do. That's helping you with traction. So the idea is to ask ourselves which external triggers are serving us and which are we serving, and to remove those external triggers that aren't serving us by hacking back. A big part of what I talk about in Hooked is around how do we as product designers shape these external triggers. And the fact is that the product designers have gotten so good at inserting these external triggers throughout our environments that we have to take steps to hack back. The good news is that this isn't anywhere near as difficult as we think, right? I don't want to hear about technology being addictive and hijacking your brain if you are one of the 2/3 of smartphone owners who never adjust their notification settings. Did you hear that right? 2/3 of people with a smartphone never bother to take 10 minutes to change those goddamn notification settings so that their phones aren't buzzing and pinging them all day. And so we've got to manage those external triggers. It just takes a few minutes. I actually have a chapter in the book where I literally show you how to hack back all your external triggers on your phone in about 50 minutes. It really takes very little time. You do it once, and it's a life changer. But the external triggers on your phone is only part of the problem. You've got the external triggers on your desktop. And I think the real elephant in the room are the external triggers in the workplace. You know, the open office floor plan is a curse when it comes to trying to do focused work, because, you know, Bill from accounting stops by and wants to talk for just a quick sec, and then your boss comes by and wants to chat it up. So part of what we have to do is to remove those external triggers, to hack back all of these external triggers in our environment so we can do what we plan to do, to get that focused work done, to spend time the way we intended to spend it. Everything else is a distraction. And then finally, the fourth step, the first step, just to review real quick, is manage internal triggers. Step 2 is to make time for traction. Step 3 is to hack back external triggers. And step 4 is to prevent distraction with pacts. And so the idea here is that we can use these tools, many of them free out there, to do what's called using a pre-commitment device. A pre-commitment device basically keeps you from doing something you don't want to do. So the beauty of the free market we live in, not that it's perfect, but one of the things it does really well is give people the products and services they're looking for. So when people a few years ago started complaining about technology being too distracting and taking up too much of their time, thousands of budding entrepreneurs answered the call, and they have made for us these apps and services to help us stay focused. So every morning I write, that's what I do for a living, and it's really hard work. It's hard to stay focused. And so what I have to do is I use one app on my phone called Forest. I open up this app, it's free, and there's a little virtual tree that is planted when I push one button. If I pick up my phone during the given period of time that I've set, that little virtual tree dies. Now, it's just a stupid little virtual tree, who cares, right? But it's enough to remind me that I've set a pact with myself, that I've made a pre-commitment to not do anything but the thing I want to do right now. Another technology that I liked so much, I actually invested in the company, is a product called FocusMate. FocusMate, remember Chat Roulette a few years ago? Remember that product, Chat Roulette? Yeah. So it's just like Chat Roulette, but it's for getting work done, and it doesn't have all the dirty, nasty stuff that used to happen on Chat Roulette. Basically, here's how it works. You book a time with a FocusMate on this site, focusmate.com, and you set a time that you're going to do work together. So you say, okay, 9 a.m., you're matched with another person that you may or may not know. Usually you don't know that person. And then you see them through a video screen on your computer. And then you say, hello, I'm so-and-so, here's what I'm working on. You introduce very, very quickly. You're supposed to do it in less than 2 minutes. And then you get to work for 50 minutes. And just the fact that you have somebody else watching you and working alongside you is incredibly helpful to help you make a pact, make a pre-commitment to get done what you need to do. Now, it's very important that I emphasize here that that's the last step, that after you've learned to manage your internal triggers, after you've made time for traction, after you've hacked back the external triggers, the last step, as the last resort, is to prevent distraction with pacts. But if you use these 4 techniques, this is how you become indistractable. This is how we put distraction in its place and make sure that we do the things we really want to do.
Oh man, so much good stuff in there, and thank you for explaining the indistractable model. That you just answered a lot of the questions that I was going to ask you in explaining the model.
I'll give you another example of what I do. I guess it was about 2 years ago, I decided it was time to get into shape. So I'm 41 now, and I could see 40 approaching at the time. And I said, you know what? I really need to start getting in shape. I actually used to be clinically obese. And so I changed my diet, and that was a very transformative time in my life. And then I said, okay, it's time to hit the gym, right? And I've never been physically active in the least. I mean, I joined the high school wrestling team because I wanted to try and get in shape, but I never won a match. I mean, it was terrible. I was the worst. I was just like the most unathletic person you've ever met.
Well, at least you didn't get cauliflower ear too bad.
No, because I never actually was sent out to wrestle anybody. I just went to practices because I was so horrible. But anyway, so I decided I need to start hitting the gym, and the what anybody who's successfully into athleticism will tell you is that it's consistency over intensity. That if you're a weekend warrior and you're out there in the gym and you're sweating up like crazy, just like many people do after New Year's, and then a couple weeks later they stop because they get burned out. So I knew that I had to do this for the rest of my life. And so what I did, I implemented what's called the burn or burn technique. I made this up, burn or burn technique. The burn or burn technique works like this. Every morning when I step into my closet to get dressed, I have a calendar. And on that calendar, I have attached to it a pen, $100, and then right above my calendar, there's a shelf right above it, I have a lighter. And here's what happens every single day. I have a choice to make when I see that calendar. I can either go to the gym and metaphorically burn some calories, or if I don't do what I said I'm going to do, I have to burn the $100 bill. Okay?
Oh my goodness.
So a lot of people say what you say, oh my God, you're burning the $100 bill. That's crazy. It's been 2.5 years now. I've never burned the $100 bill. Why? Because I go to the damn gym, right? I do what I say I'm going to do. And that's a little bit of enough motivation to see that it has to be taped. You can't just say, oh, I'll spend it on charity or I'll give it to a friend. No. You have to physically burn it up. And I know that's illegal, but whatever. Wow. Skip that fact. Because again, the goal is to not actually burn it. The goal is to go to the goddamn gym and do what you promise yourself you're going to do. So this is a great example of another pre-commitment device, a price pact, that I've made myself this promise and I can see it every day, what I need to do. And you know what the amazing thing is? That after a few years of doing this, I love going to the gym. I used to hate it. Now I actually really enjoy it. It's become part of my routine. And so it's a joy. I would pay to go because I enjoy it so much.
We all know how important user research is, but it can often suck up the time you'd rather be spending making your product shine. Ping Pong is a user research platform that automates the admin work so you can focus on having deep, meaningful conversations with your users. Run user tests and interviews on the platform so you can iterate faster, gather more insights, and build more usable products that your customers will love and trust. If you want to give Ping Pong a try, simply go to userdefenders.com/pingpong and use promo code UserDefenders to get 25% off your first purchase. Wow. Those are such great examples of really using internal and external triggers to your advantage. Like I think there's, like we discussed earlier, there's good and bad, right? And it's really up to you as to what you make of those. And so I just love the examples that you mentioned. Like those are super helpful ways to kind of, like you said, hack back on those triggers that they already are going to exist anyway, and they're going to attempt to distract us. But when there's skin in the game, like you said, and you make packs, there's skin in the game, it just gives you that extra motivation that you need.
This pack stuff is the fourth step. So it's super important that everyone listening understands that is not the first line of defense. You have to do the other things first or you're going to get into trouble. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you for putting that out there, because that is super important. You tell a really cool, interesting story in the book about your Daily Milky Way story when you were an educator.
Yeah.
Can you tell that story real quick, and then I want to follow it up with a question.
Yeah. So real quick. So the idea there is when I'm explaining the concept of external triggers and how we have to hack back these external triggers. I talk about when I took a year off between high school and college. I did a gap year after high school where I was an AmeriCorps volunteer. It's kind of a domestic Peace Corps. So I taught in a middle school in an underprivileged school in Atlanta. And in the teacher's lounge every day for an entire school year, there was this vending machine that was served as an external trigger. It was a call to action. It was a prompt that told me, hey, Milky Way right over here. And I would eat one every single day at the same exact time, right after lunch. That was my daily ritual because of this external trigger in my environment prompting me to action. The end result was another, 3 cavities that year and another, 5-10 pounds of fat that I gained because I ate those Milky Ways every day. But that's an example of how
Milky Ways are so good.
They're so good.
I have a question about this, though. It's like, a lot of us are in environments that we really can't control. We can't control our workplace, especially. I work somewhere where donuts and bagels are brought in every single Friday. And for a while at our old office, we had a soda fountain. And so there's a lot of, and the candy always right in front of my desk. That the table was always right in front of my desk. So I guess I developed some willpower, but I'm just wondering, what do we do in environments? Like I'm in an open office space now. You touched on earlier. Those are super distracting environments. And somehow somebody in Silicon Valley thought that they were the best way to make products, but they're super distracting. So what do we do? Like, what are some tips you can offer to help us, maybe break unhealthy habits that are occurring in environments we can't easily change?
Yeah, so there's a few things we can do. So, first and foremost is following this model around managing the internal triggers. It's amazing how often we, just because we're on the topic of food here, it's amazing how often we eat not because we are hungry, but because we fear being hungry. A great example of this is the Snickers commercial. And you've probably seen this where they talk about, how you're not yourself if you're hungry. And so don't be hungry. Like that's going to, you're going to die if you're hungry for 20 minutes. That's the worst thing in the world. But of course, think about it, right? Like, our mothers used to tell us, take a snack because you might get hungry later. So what we have done is conditioned ourselves to eat even when we're not hungry. So this is a great example of how we have to understand that internal trigger. Are you actually eating because you're hungry, or are you eating because you're trying to manage the discomfort of an emotion? Right? I know that for me, when I was really struggling with my weight, and again, I used to be clinically obese, that was my problem. I was eating because I felt sad. I was eating because I was bored. I was eating for 100 different reasons, only one of which, rarely, was that I was hungry, which is the only legitimate internal trigger to actually eat something, right? So that's the first step, understanding those real internal triggers. If you're using it as an escape to an uncomfortable emotion, guess what? It's not the Snickers that's doing it to you. It's what's going on inside. Remember, distraction starts from within. The second step is to make time for what you really want to do. So a big reason why people eat the wrong stuff is because they haven't properly planned to eat the right stuff, right? So if I had a more healthful dessert that wasn't going to spike my blood sugar, and I know that Snickers was bad for me, I wouldn't have had the daily Snickers. And this is the thing. So much money is made on dieting books and business books and self-help books that basically tell you what you already know. You know what to do. We know how to lose weight. Who out there thinks that chocolate cake is healthier than a salad? Nobody knows. Everybody knows how you lose weight. But we don't do it. And so that's why I wrote Indistractable, is not to tell you what to do. I don't care what your goals are. That's up for you to decide based on your values and what's important to you. What I want to help you do is whatever it is that you want to do, I'm going to make that possible by telling you how to not get distracted. Distraction is the real problem because you don't have a lack of knowledge. You simply don't have the abilities and the skill set to remove distraction. So then the next thing we would do is to change those external triggers. So for example, when it comes to food in our environment, we can't always control every environment that we're in, but there's many we can control. So for example, I talk about in this book, this technique I call progressive extremism. That starts off with deciding something that you are not going to have anymore, and which sounds kind of crazy, right? That sounds so extreme, but it has to be something simple that you can give up. So I'll give you an example. For me, I didn't go straight into, I'm never eating refined carbohydrates ever again. I'm never going to eat sugar. That's too much of a leap. And everybody does that, around New Year's. I'm never eating this. Or I'm going to go on, or even worse, is I'm going to go on this diet for the next 60 days and then I'm going to look great. I'm going to do P90X, or I'm going to do this temporary thing. And this is the reason why diets don't work, is because they're temporary, right? What do you expect? You do P90X. What do you expect to happen on day 91? If you go back to your old habits, you're going to regain the weight. You're going to go back to your old habits, your old ways of being. So So the idea is to remove one thing from your life forever, right? With this new healthier lifestyle, this healthier way of doing things, this new healthy habit that you're adopting, but it has to be something easy. So for me, for example, one of the first things I removed was sugary sodas. Still have diet, that's okay. But I started with no sugary sodas in the house. That was the rule. So I removed the external trigger of having sugar sweetened soda in the house. Okay, I could still have it outside, could still have diet. And then when I was ready, and that was very easy, that was no big deal. And then I took the next small step, which was, you know what? I'm not even gonna have diet soda in the house. I can still have it when I travel or when I go out, just not in the house. So I removed those external triggers that didn't serve me. So I described this with a lot more depth, so I'm trying to make it short here. A lot more depth about how you can remove these external triggers that don't serve you in your life, whether it's around food, whether it's around other distractions. When it comes to the workplace, for example, the open office, I actually give a link to print out this little sign that we can put on our desks or on our computer monitors that say, I'm indistractable right now, right? I know a lot of people say, oh, I wear headphones. That's rubbish. People don't know if you're just listening to a podcast or music and they still interrupt you. You know that's true. But when you put a sign with a big red, paper that says, I'm indistractable right now, don't bother me unless it's an emergency, people get the hint. And so that's another way that we can use these, we can hack back these unwanted external triggers.
This episode is also made possible by something super cool, an alternative to the .com domain name. It's the, drumroll please, .design domain name. Try saying that 5 times fast. So if you're a designer, and I know you are, and you've thought of a sweet name for your website that just isn't available under .com, check out .design. Chances are the perfect domain name you want is waiting for you on a bearskin rug. Okay, maybe not the rug, but wouldn't that be great? Head to userdefenders.com/porkbun now and use coupon code DEFENDERS on the checkout page to get literally a free year of a .design domain name bundled with free email hosting, Whois privacy, and even SSL certs. Don't wait. Grab your .design domain name now before someone else does. Go to userdefenders.com/porkbun now and use coupon code DEFENDERS. So good. Defenders, this is such a good book. You got to get the book. I'm serious. It's really, really good. And Nir did such an incredible job of citing his resources, of everything he mentions. I was just blown away when I was reading through it. And I mean, there's links to everything you cite. It's like completely factual and scientific, all the stuff you put in your book. So thank you for that, by the way. But you tell a story about the pharmaceutical industry. And that's really, this is when life and death situations come in and distractions, when pharmacists are being distracted filling prescriptions. It's really a big problem.
Yeah, no, let me mention it real quick because I think it's really illustrative of the point. So it turns out that if I were to ask you, okay, pop quiz, what are the 3 leading causes of death in the United States? I'll give you the first 2. Number 1 is heart disease. Number 2 is cancer. What's number 3? Right? Most people would think, oh, it's car accidents or Alzheimer's or stroke. Not even close. If it was a disease, the number 3 cause of death in the United States of America would be prescription mistakes. People in hospitals receiving the wrong medication or the wrong dosage of medication. Okay? 200,000 people are affected by a completely preventable human error. So for most hospitals in America, they just believe that this is, that's what happens. Nothing we can do about it. Until a brave group of nurses at UCSF in San Francisco decided to tackle this problem. This group of nurses wanted to figure out, why was this happening? Why were nurse practitioners giving people the wrong dosage of medication? What was going on? What was causing all these prescription mistakes? Because remember, this isn't people, taking the wrong medication at home. This is inside the hospital. So a hospital worker is to blame.
A safe place, what we know is a safe place for a recovery.
Right, where people go to get better. And so, a terrible problem. And so what they did after they studied this problem, they found a way to reduce prescription mistakes by 88%. They almost eliminated the problem. And when they got down to what was causing this problem, they realized the problem was distraction. That when nurse practitioners were dosing out medication, they were constantly interrupted by physicians, by fellow nurses, by patients. They were constantly interrupted. And so when they were distracted, they would make mistakes. By the way, this should sound pretty familiar. In the workplace, if you're constantly distracted, you also make mistakes that degrade the quality of your performance. And so, you know what the solution was? Well, you know, because you read the book, but the solution wasn't a fancy pants app. It wasn't some crazy multi-million-dollar technology solution, some smart dispenser. The solution was cheap plastic vests. These nurses wore a bright orange vest that told their colleagues, don't interrupt me right now, I'm dosing medication. So they hacked back the external triggers that would lead them to potential distraction. Amazing, right? Such a simple solution. And so we as knowledge workers need to do the same thing. That's where this idea for this screen sign that I put in the book, where you can print out and you have this little sign on your desk that says, I'm indistractable right now. That's where that idea came from.
Hey, it's Seth. I'm an author, a blogger, and an entrepreneur, and I run the Alt MBA. And I fight for the users. You're listening to User Defenders Podcast with Jason Ogle.
Thanks for telling that story, Nir. I love that so much. And that is like, I think that's one of the epitomes of the importance of applying these principles in our lives. And I guess this kind of segues into, I have two questions, but I'm going to kind of combine them because they're really related. It's just about kind of the consequences. You just mentioned one really big consequence to distraction in the healthcare industry. What other consequences are we facing as a society, especially with the direction we're heading with distraction? Like, where are we heading as a species and society if we don't start taking back control of our distractibility? And even in this artificially intelligent driven economy we're heading, headlong into, these machines are extremely indistractable. What does that mean, right? I mean, what does that mean for us, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think there's some pretty profound implications, right? So I think unlike most tech critics out there who are pretty pessimistic, I'm actually quite optimistic. I'm very long on human ingenuity. The human species is very good at adapting their behaviors and adopting new technology. So adaptation and adoption of different behaviors and new technologies is what always propelled our species forward. So I'm very, very optimistic about the human species. I will say that those who don't adopt these techniques, those who don't become indistractable, sooner rather than later are going to suffer for it. There really will be a bifurcation of people who know how to manage distraction, know how to manage their attention, and those who don't. And those who don't will be a lot worse off for it. Because if you think about, what kind of jobs in the future won't be automated away? What kind of things can technology not do? Well, it's the kind of things that require human creativity, right? They require not following the rules. Algorithms are really good at following a set series of commands. But when it comes to creativity, that's something that until we get a generalizable intelligence, we're very far from creating. Those are the kind of jobs that are going to be more in demand and that won't get automated away, right? All the simple rote tasks, those can be pragmatized. So what we need to do is to prepare ourselves and our children to be able to concentrate, to focus, to be able to be creative. And the only way to do that is to have the kind of focus that we need to do creative work. And the only way to do that is to learn these skills, to become indistractable. When we think about our relationships, psychologists tell us that loneliness is as detrimental to our health as obesity and smoking. And part of the reason that we have this epidemic of loneliness is because we can't form relationships with other people when our heads are down in our phones and we're not actually speaking to each other. So if we don't learn to manage distraction and have face-to-face interactions when we're around people that we want to connect with, our friends, our families, our significant others, we need to be fully present for them, and our health will suffer for it unless we form those bonds. So we have to know how to put that distraction away by becoming indistractable. And then finally, when it comes to our kids, many people tell me how distracted their kids are these days, and oh my gosh, they're on Fortnite and they're on Facebook and they're on Instagram and they just can't focus and they're, they don't have attention spans like we used to have. And then when I dig a little deeper and ask, well, what are your tech habits? It's the parents who are teaching kids that their phones are more important than they are.
Ouch.
And so for the sake of our children, we have to show them, hey, I'm with you, man. I learned this lesson as well. We as parents have to set a good example. That's if you want your kid to have a healthy relationship with technology, you have to model that behavior for their sake.
So as we close, Nir, I want to kind of bring it right back around to where we started in the origin story. You mentioned about what really compelled you to write this book, and it has to do with your daughter. And is your daughter's name Jasmine?
Yes.
I love that you dedicated this book to her. I just thought that was so special, and I didn't even have to think. I was like, it took me a second. I was like, that's his daughter's name, because you opened the book with that really emotive story. And that you told us too in the beginning of this interview. I think that's so special. You dedicated this to her, and I want to know, did you ever find out what superpower she wanted?
Yeah. So I did. So I actually went back and I asked her, because as I was relating the story in the book, I was like, okay, now I'm just curious. Like, what superpower does she want? And honest to God, this is what she told me. She told me she would want the power to always be kind. That's the superpower she wanted. I know, right? That's what she said. I thought she would say like to fly or X-ray vision. No. She said to always be kind. And I just was like, it gives me goosebumps even relating that story to you, because a few things occurred when I heard that. One, I was like, oh my God, I have such a wonderful kid. So I'll brag a little bit.
I've got the feels are just hitting me.
I know, right? But the other thing that I realized is that kindness isn't really a superpower, right? We all can be kind. And in a way that was just such a perfect metaphor for this struggle around distraction, that managing distraction is also something that all of us can do. That a lot of tech critics these days, they tell you that technology is hijacking your brain, that it's addictive, that it's irresistible, that there's nothing you can do. It's all about the big bad tech companies doing it to you. But that's not true. Because what we know is that when we give up control, it's called learned helplessness. When we think that something is more powerful than we are, we give up. We justify our behavior. In fact, there have been studies around alcoholics, and they've determined that the number one factor of whether an alcoholic will relapse, get this, is not their level of physical dependency. It is their belief in their own power to change. Think about that.
Wow.
More than the physical dependency is their belief in their power to change. So when we think that technology is so powerful that it's telling us what to do, that it's addictive, which is a horrible word, we should not use it except for the most extreme cases for an actual medical condition. The vast majority of people out there are not addicted to technology. It's just something we overuse. So these metaphors matter. If we call something addictive, we act like we cannot control it. Whereas if we call something, hey, you know what, this is something sometimes I go overboard on, and so I need to figure out how to manage it better. Because the fact is, all of us can manage distraction. We can all be indistractable.
Oh, so good. So good. Learned helplessness. That is fascinating. I hadn't heard that before. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like our brains are eavesdropping on our self-talk.
Yeah, and I agree. Look, I will be the first to tell you that technology is designed to be engaging. No doubt about it. I know. I hear it all the time. Oh, these things are designed to be addictive and blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. But it's not going away. Right? We can't put this, we can't go backwards in time. And this stuff is not, if anything, things are going to become more engaging, if anything. Yeah. So that's why we need to learn how to live with it, not, cross our arms and say, well, I'm going to wait until, these tech companies make their products less engaging. That ain't going to happen. They're going to continue to make them things that we want to use. And we want them to do that, right? We want products to get better and better. That's called progress. That's not a problem. So it's up to us, by and large, except for people who are in protected classes. And I should mention, there are people who need help. Children, for example, they are a protected class. There are certain books I wouldn't let my kid read. There's certain movies I wouldn't let her watch. And of course, there are certain apps and things on the internet I wouldn't let her do without supervision. I think also addicts, people who are actually addicted, about the single digit percentage of people who really do have a problem where they want to stop using but can't. There are people out there, many of them have comorbidity with OCD, but the vast majority of people out there, this is not an addiction. It's, if anything, it's about overuse, and we can make sure that we can get this under control. It's not all that hard as long as you know the technique.
Ah, so good. And, we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? But we can learn how to squeeze out just enough that we need to do the good that we need to do for ourselves. Nir, what's the superpower that you would want in closing?
Well, It was being indistractable. I will tell you. I mean, that was really the motivation for writing this book was how imagine what you could accomplish for a minute. Just think about what if everything that you said you would do, you did. That to me was the superpower. I mean, that blows my mind. All the things that I've said in my life before I was indistractable that I never followed up on. And my life has changed so much in the past few years since I started researching this book. It's amazing. I mean, I've lost weight, I've gained muscle, I have the best relationship in my life that I've ever had with my wife. We've been married 17 years. I'm closer to my daughter. I published 2 books. I am way more productive and way happier than I ever have been because I am better at keeping promises to myself.
And I'm so glad you wrote this book, Nir. Defenders, pick it up. There'll be a link in the show notes. It's just super good, and there's so much more that we don't even have time to talk about in the book. So, Nir, thanks so much for being here again and sharing so much wisdom and knowledge with us. I appreciate you. You are a superhero of mine, man.
Aw, thank you.
You really are, truly.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jason.
And I hope to have you on to talk about your next book, because I know there's a lot more. You have a lot more to offer. You're just getting started, I think. So tell us how to connect and to keep up with you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, so my website is nirandfar.com, and Nir is spelled like my first name, N-I-R, so Nir and Far. And my first book is Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And my next book, Indistractable, will be released in the fall of 2019. And that's it, I think.
All right. And last but not least, I just want to say, as always, fight on, my friend.
Thank you so much, Jason. It was a pleasure.
Do you remember what life was like before we had all these supercomputers in our pockets? These always on, always connected slot machines, wooing us to reach in, feel their sleek, smooth surface, and constantly beckoning us to peer into their hypnotic, glowing glass. I remember 25 years ago as a corporate lease driver having to use a Thomas Brothers every time I needed to make a delivery. Depending on your age, you may not remember what life was like before smartphones, because you may have grown up with one, or grown up pining for your parents' attention to get their noses out of one for even a few moments of eye contact. We can't even bear to sit with the boredom of a few moments of a red light without seeing if we got another like on that vacation food photo, or respond to that text message. We're wirelessly hardwired for distraction, but it's critical to remember that we're not victims unless we choose to be. Nir's new book, Indistractable, really opened my eyes to this truth. We can choose whether we're going to constantly massage the squirrel or stay focused on that important work that requires our full attention. Do you think we could have gotten to the moon in less than 7 years if the attention of the engineers were constantly being pulled into these beautiful devices? We can choose, and we must choose well. Our kids are watching and imitating us. Empathy is becoming a lost art. Let's take back control and no longer be slaves, but masters of our technologies. Definitely pick up Indistractable, Defenders. There's a link in the show notes at userdefenders.com/064. where if you buy it through my link, you'll be helping User Defenders at no additional cost to you. I also want to remind you that the brand new t-shirt, Resist Massaging the Squirrel, is available today at userdefenders.com/store. Tell the world in a fun way that you are becoming indistractable and are the master of your devices. Visit userdefenders.com/store and order yours today. Tweet your takeaways. I'm at User Defenders and Nir is at Nir Eyal, and we would love to engage with you around this episode and your takeaways. I want to thank Optimal Workshop, Ping Pong, and Pork Bun for sponsoring this episode of User Defenders. Please check out their offers on the show notes at userdefenders.com/064 and support them if you can. It truly helps me continue to bring this content to you. Please be sure to check out User Defenders community at community.userdefenders.com. There's some incredible trainings happening there for free for members, and just some amazing, inspiring designers that are super passionate about making a difference in this work. It's just a great place, and I'd love to invite you out to check it out for free for 7 days. Simply go to community.userdefenders.com. I have a really cool episode coming. It's with Jasmine O, and it's called Yes, AI Will Replace Designers. I'm not going to lie, this one made me a little nervous in talking to Jasmine, but it was there's a hopeful tone to it, so it's not all doom and gloom. But there are some things that she shares with us that are very important for us to pay attention to. So I can't wait to bring that to you. I couldn't think of a better time to do it as well. So thanks so much for listening, Defenders. I really appreciate it, and for telling your other designer friends about the show and subscribing at userdefenders.com/subscribe. I can't thank you enough. So until next time, fight on, my friends.